So this is a hub bearing. You can see the bearing back here. It's pressed onto a hub. This is the location. It's in all wheels, and it's bolted to the actual knuckle. And now we're going to show you the process of removing the wheel hub. To remove your tire, a 19mm socket. And these are studs, not actual lug nuts. That last one, I'm going to just partially pull out, make sure my hands are free. And now we can grab the tire and pull it right off. So we're going to remove the anti-rattle clip first. Screwdriver or pry bar. There's 2 grooves it sits in. Just pull the pin part of it out like that, and then follow it around. So this caliper is held on with 2 slider pins that are in these rubber boots. They have caps on them, so you're just going to take a little screwdriver, pop it off, or you can get it with your own fingers, and just set them aside because you're going to reuse those. Now the inside of there, that slider pin is a 7mm Allen head. We're going to break that caliper bolt free. And then the top one. And if you're looking up torque specs ever, this is what they call the slider or caliper pin to bracket. And then you have the caliper bracket to knuckle. So there are 2 different torques on those. Once it's unthreaded from the actual bracket, we'll just see if we can wiggle it out. Pull that slider all the way out because we're going to clean it up before we put it back together. And now we can take the caliper and wiggle it off. Use a pry bar if you need to. There we go. And there we have the caliper with the inner pad still on. Here's my caliper hook that I'm going to use. I'm just going to bring it up here real quick on the spring of the strut. And I'll take the pad out. There's the clips that lock it in. Now I'm going to get my tool that pushes that piston back. You can use a pair of like welder pliers, anything that you can get in there. I like to use the actual tool. It just goes smoother. And what you're looking for when you're doing this is the amount of pressure that it takes to put that piston back into the caliper. This is just a dust boot, but there's a seal right in here on this ridge line. And if this starts to leak brake fluid, the seal's blown, and then the piston will be no good. So we're just going to go back real slow. I got the tension on it. Now I'm going to break open my bleeder screw. This is where I don't want to reverse the fluid because I have an ABS module in this car. So I will open this bleeder screw. I have a catch bucket underneath. I'll try to aim it down this way. Oh, so that tells me, I bet you this bleeder screw is clogged quite a bit because that's pretty loose. Get my hand. There we go. So I'm going to clean this up. Normally I would leave that bleeder screw in, like I said, and just crack it a little bit and it would just come right out. But we just discovered the bleeder screw is completely clogged. So I'm going to bottom this out. I'm going to leave that bucket down there to catch any dripping. Take my tool out of the way, and now I'm going to just hang this real quick so that I can clean this bleeder screw out. So now we're just going to remove the outer pad, which is really easy. It just literally lifts and slides out. So now we're going to remove the actual brake caliper bracket from the knuckle. There's 2 mounting bolts right here, and they're a 15mm socket. I'm just going to break it free. Get the top one. Now I'll use my electric tool to speed up that process. They do have a washer on them, so make sure You don't lose that. It's just the way the manufacturer does this one. Set these aside. Take the bracket out. And we're going to clean that up because that is quite dirty. So now we're going to remove our rotor from the hub, and you'll see this little pin on this particular car, and that is a 10mm socket deep. And you're just going to take it off. It holds the rotor in place because obviously there's no wheel studs. So hold on to the rotor, take that pin out. Let's see if it stays. There it goes. I'll show you what the pin looks like. Set it aside, and we'll just take that rotor right off. So now we got to the hub to do the wheel bearing, and we have to take this axle nut out. 13mm socket, and we'll take this bolt right out. So now that the center axle bolt is out, I can twist the wheel around, and I'm exposing the 2 strut mounting bolts because I'm going to take the strut out because the axle's still in the way to get those 4 mounting bolts for that wheel bearing. So we're going to just move this ABS sensor right here into this bracket. Just want to give it some more flex. Take it right out of that bracket like that. And we're going to remove this ABS sensor. It's right here in the V-bone of this knuckle, 10mm socket. And we'll pull the sensor right out so we don't strain it or break it. So we're just going to get the socket right down in there. Let's get that bolt out. And hopefully that sensor will wiggle free. Look at that, like magic. And then we're going to remove our 2 mounting bolts. And that's a 21mm socket and an 18mm wrench. Let's get the bottom one freed. And then we can take that lower bolt out. There's a flat washer and a nut on the other side. Reassemble those so you don't lose them. Now we're taking the top nut off. Make sure that washer comes off, we don't lose it. As you can see, the strut's ready to pop right out of that knuckle. Give it a little pull and tug. Push that axle back. There we go. I'm gonna get that axle. So now I'm just gonna use my pry bar and break that strut off of that knuckle the rest of the way. Just so you know, some people might say this is extreme and they undo the ball joint. Manufacturer might actually recommend the ball joint to come out to do this job. I personally, the bolts come out easier. I'm gonna get in alignment because I always do alignments if I touch anything in my suspension. So this way it's gonna get lined up. The ball joint, I'm not replacing, doesn't need to be, it works good. But if I do take the ball joint out, I might compromise it and have to replace it. So this to me is easier, just make sure you get in alignment after. So look at that, now look at that, nice freedom. We can really get back there and get those bolts out. So now we can clearly see all 4 mounting bolts for this wheel hub bearing, and the ABS sensor is out because if not, it would hang down right in here. And we want that out of the way. So 18mm socket, and we're gonna take all 4 bolts out. I'm going to leave that one on just a hair so when I tap it with the hammer it doesn't actually fall out and hit my foot. So with a hammer I'm just going to hit this. Now I have that bolt partially still in, so hopefully it doesn't fall all the way out. Give it a couple good whacks. There it is. All right, so I moved the axle aside so that I could set this up. I'm just going to wrap it around because I'm going to clean this. It's pretty dirty. So I'm just going to take a bungee cord and clean this up. Take that bolt out, get that out of the way. And I'm going to actually take my backing plate off. You don't have to do that, but the important part for the wheel bearing is to clean this area right in here. All right, so to get this aluminum oxide clean, I'm going to use a wire air tool, wire brush. Now I'm going to reattach my backing plate that I took off. I didn't take that off for cleaning the hub, although it helped right there. I took it off because it was loaded with grease because the axle boot had broken at one point. And I am here, so I did it, but you don't have to if your backing plate is in perfect shape. So to prevent that oxidization forming again with steel and aluminum, I like to spray this whole thing with a copper never seize. That's high temp. Copper is higher than the silver. And then that way we can get a good surface and have no frozen future wheel bearing. So here's the wheel bearing. This is actually the magnet pickup. So we're just going to mount it just like that. I'm going to get the 4 bolts, and I'm going to put one right through and start it by hand, always by hand. This is not something you want to cross thread, huh? So we got 4 bolts in total. I'm going to snug that up and then we'll torque it to factory spec. 18mm socket, and like I said, I'm just going to snug these up in a crisscross pattern. Like really lightly bottom them out. So the first torque specs to go around, because there's 3 actual steps. First step is 20 newton meters, which comes out to 14.7 foot-pounds, and they want you to do it in a crisscross pattern. So pretty much, there we go, I got movement out of that one. I'll come up to the top one over here, and then the bottom one. All right, so now we're going to jump it up to 60 newton meters, which turns out to be 44.2 foot-pounds. So I might actually put this knuckle, maybe you can do this at home too, without the axle, because I don't really want the axle in my way. See if I can get this to go up inside the strut and get my torque wrench back there, so that way it works smarter, not harder. I just want to put 1 bolt in. That's all I want out of this. There we go. I'm not going to put the nut on or anything. I just want to see if I can get it to stop. Perfect. Now I can actually put some torque on this and really put my back into it. All right, so now 18mm socket, and we're going to torque this in a crisscross pattern, 44.2 foot-pounds. Go up to the top one. All right, I just double check before I do the last step because I want to make sure that they're all equal. The last step is an additional 60 degrees. So luckily my torque wrench has that option. We're going to line up the actual part over here on the wheel bearing. Get that caliper out of the way. Line the strut up, the base of the strut. Get that lined up. And now we can have freedom to spin this. You're going to look inside that wheel bearing. You see the splines? Let's see if it goes right in. So if you look right here, you can see the splines of the hub, and then the axle lines right up. Push it right in. Just like that. Nice. Now we can put a bolt in the lower strut because I've already kind of lined that up. Now I have a bolt here. Remember the washer goes on the nut side, so the bolt was through the front and the nut was on the back side. I don't know if it matters, but I just like to stick to the pattern. So I'm going to put the nut on, just doing this all just to hold it in place. And the same with the front, the top one I mean. Now you're just going to push on this knuckle so it lines up that way. Give it a wiggle, push that bolt through, and now we're all set. So this is the speed sensor / ABS sensor, and it goes in this cutout that you see in the knuckle. It goes right down into the hub hole like that. We're going to just try to line it up best we can. There we go. I'm going to put the actual holder in place so that way I don't have to worry about the wire moving on me while I put the bolt back in. Just like that. And then we have this 6mm bolt. Perfect. I think I got it. That's a 10mm socket. So we're just going to grab one deep, see if we can start it by hand. All right, so now I'm going to tighten my knuckle to the bottom of the strut, and it's 21mm socket and 18mm wrench. So the best ideal alignment for this is to have this knuckle all the way in like that. I don't know if you can see that. Push it all the way in, hold that, and just bottom it out because we're going to torque it to the factory specs. Just enough. Now we'll tighten the bottom one. Okay, just snug it. Now let me get my torque wrench and we'll torque that down. 21mm socket, and the lower strut torque is 59 foot-pounds. And I'm going to put my 18mm wrench on there, 59 foot-pounds. Then the lower one. So now I'm going to put the axle bolt in. It does come with a new one. Strongly recommend using a new one because you can stretch the threads on these, and that's not exactly what we want. So hand start it, 13mm socket, and I'm just going to bottom it out, and then I'll torque it to the factory specs. I'll get my torque wrench. We have this, and I'm going to go over, and it's 26 foot-pounds. So now that I bottomed it out, I'm going to have to torque that once I get my rotor on and caliper on so I can hold this hub from spinning. So while that hub is drying, I'm going to take the actual caliper bracket and I'm going to clean up where those pads slide in and out because it doesn't come with tins. There's no hardware on this particular model. So you want to get rid of all this rust buildup. If you can't get it clean with a flat brush, then bring it to a wire wheel if you have one. That's always the fastest way to do it. You can take a flathead screwdriver and chip away at some of that metal, but don't hit and chip away at the steel. Just get rid of that surface rust, because that actually will stop those pads from sliding in and out of this bracket. Now it comes to our caliper sliders, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take these to the wire brush. You can try to do it by hand. Sorry. Maybe you have some sandpaper at home, but you want these things shiny. You want to get all that debris off because caliper grease ends up getting hard after a while, and it can really stick to the steel and cause this not to slide freely in and out of that rubber boot, which is what the job is. So we want it to do its job. We want it to be nice and smooth. And there is the finished product, nice and clean. I used a little brake clean to get the final coating off, and there we go. So before I put the new rotor on, and after I've cleaned my hub surface, I always spray with a Never Cease of, I like to use copper because it's high pressure, high temperature. And now what I can do is turn the rotor this way, see if it will stay, and I can clean this with parts cleaner and get rid of any of the packaging oils that it comes with. Just want to get the packaging oil off. Then I'm going to spin it around and line up one of these bolt holes with the mounting hole. And don't forget that if you're using a high performance rotor that has the cooling drill slots, that's what we call this, drilled, you want the angle to be going into the wind, not with the wind. I'm going to take my mounting pin and just Start it with my fingers and then 10mm socket, and I'm going to torque that down. So I'm going to hold it flush to the surface, and I'm going to take away 10mm socket, snug that up. Now I can clean the front surface from the oils, the packaging, and let that dry. So now I'm going to take my cleaned caliper bracket, one I cleaned up, slide it back in. I'm going to put the top bolt on first, and always start it by hand. I don't want to cross thread anything. And then put the bottom bolt in. I'm going to snug those up with my electric 3/8 drive. My 15mm socket, I'm just going to snug these bolts up. Now I'm going to get my torque wrench and torque them to specs. And the torque specs to caliper bracket to knuckle for front brakes is 74 foot-pounds. That's a 15mm socket. Double check. I'm going to put the outer pad on, and you'll see how nice that sits in there now that's all cleaned up. No grease anywhere. You don't want to put any caliper grease on there. I don't like it. Grease only attracts dirt and sand, and then you're going to have a bind that will bind up and it won't flow freely. Now we can take our caliper off that hook. Get the caliper hook out of the way. And now I'm just going to take my inner pad and line up those 3 springs and push it right into place. There we go. See how it sits nice in there? I'm going to take some silicone paste or caliper grease. Once I put this, line this up here, I'm going to put some silicone slider grease right inside that boot. You can also put it on the actual slider pins, like this. Coat that, and then also coat the inside of the boot. Do it to both sides. I'm going to get one pin started. And that is a 7mm hex socket. So I'm going to just use my 3/8 ratchet to bottom this slider right out. Don't be afraid to wiggle the caliper to get it to start. And then I put my bottom pin already in, and I get my Sil Glide all over it, and I'm just gonna bottom them out because we are going to torque this to factory specs. So the torque specs on the caliper slider pins to bracket is 20 foot-pounds. And that is the 7mm Allen head. Don't forget to put the caps on. This keeps them clean and free of any debris as they go down the road. And the brakes come with this brand new anti-rattle spring, and the bottom bar goes underneath like that, and you're going to put this that way. So actually you can start the top in, bring it down like that. Then sometimes I take a pry bar or a screwdriver and just put it right in, tap it in. Make sure this is seated behind these little tab ears and that the flat part is on the ears that come out. Now we can tighten our axle bolt. That's 26 foot-pounds, and I can hold the actual rotor from spinning. So before you open the bleeder screw to do some gravity bleeding, I like to pump the brakes up to get those pistons seated. And then don't forget to check your master cylinder and top the fluid off. 10mm wrench will break that bleeder open. Now since we cleaned it and drilled it out, got the dirt out, it has a nice flow. Got a catch pan underneath. We're just going to let it gravity bleed, confirm there's no air in there. Being that I didn't do rear brakes at this time, I'm only opening and gravity bleeding the fronts. And then I found a rubber boot, and I'm just going to put it right over there so dirt doesn't get into it again, and I'll clean it with some parts cleaner. All right, so now we're going to put our wheel back on. Now when it comes to European cars, I always try to leave, I want to bring one of the studs and put it in my hands, because like the Volkswagens, Volvo, they have the stud lugs instead of, so you've got to hold it up in there. Make sure it's centered the best you can. Always start it by hand because that wouldn't be pretty. That's 19 millimeter, so if you want to get a socket, you can pre-start it. So the wheel torque is 81 foot-pounds, and you're always going to want to torque in a star pattern. And then double check. When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.